Hey there, Duelists! My name is Dusty, and welcome back to our casual guide to the Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card game. Today, we're going to be taking a look at what I like to call extra monsters. So these are largely going to be monsters that reside in the extra deck, but I am going to be talking about monsters that also reside in your main deck. Now, I mentioned two words, extra deck and main deck. I'll clarify those when we get more into kind of what to bring to a duel and dueling, but just so you know, your extra deck is a space for a lot of special extra monsters that we'll be talking about as we're going on. I will clarify as we're going on what monsters reside in the extra deck and what monsters reside in the main deck, but for now, just focus on kind of what we're talking about here, and don't worry so much about where these guys live. I'll clarify those when we get to it later again. So let's just jump right on into our extra monsters. Alright, and the first extra monster we're going to be talking about are ritual monsters. All cards corresponding to summoning a ritual monster or to ritual summon resides within your main deck. The biggest thing that you need to ritual summon a ritual monster is the ritual spell card. I'll touch on these guys again when we get into spell cards, but a ritual spell is special only to summon ritual monsters. So we've got a ritual monster over here, Revenge Dread Slayer, and he is a level 6. It's important to remember what level that monster is, because in order to summon him, you need to be able to sacrifice monsters that reach that level. So you need your ritual spell, and then you need the components of that ritual. So we've got two monsters here. One is a level 4 and one is a level 2. By using those two cards and the ritual spell, I can summon Revenge Dread Slayer. The unfortunate thing about ritual summoning is that in order to summon, you need all components of those cards in your hand. So you need the ritual spell, you need the monsters that add up to that level, you need your ritual monster. The nice thing though about ritual summoning is that you can exceed that level in order to summon. So say I've got the ritual spell, I've got Revenge Dread Slayer, and I've got a monster that is level 7. Or I've got cards that go past to like 8. So I've got another level 4, for example. I could use those cards to still ritual summon Revenge Dread Slayer. I'm just maybe wasting some higher level monsters in order to do that. Sometimes you gotta do that. Luckily though, thanks to all types of different support that have come out through just updates in the game, there are a lot of cards that kind of help ritual decks out there to make them get their spell cards back, or get their spell cards in their hands faster, get the ritual monsters into their hands, and get those components. There are also a lot of ritual archetypes like Revenge Dread, the Revenge Dread archetype, that has different types of ritual spells that allow you to use cards in your graveyard to kind of shuffle them back in. So a lot of ritual card or archetypes typically have kind of some built-in support, and if there's not, there is support out there for ritual decks. Alright folks, so to reiterate our ritual summon, just do a quick summoning. In order to ritual summon, you need two monsters that equal the level of your ritual monster and a ritual spell. Once you have those three components, you can then ritual summon your ritual monster. Pretty cool, huh? Alright, let's move on to our next extra deck monster. And these are the OG extra deckers, fusion monsters. Popularized and Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, which used a lot of fusion monsters. Fusion monsters has cards that exist in your main deck and your extra deck. The fusion monster yourself exists in your extra deck, while all of its components and the spell card you need exists within your main deck. So, in order to fusion summon, you need a fusion card like Polymerization here, and you need the materials listed on your fusion monster in order to summon them. So, Elemental Hero Flame Wingman here requires Elemental Hero Avian and Elemental Hero Bersernatrix in order to fusion summon him, and Polymerization. But any other fusion spell that kind of allows a fusion summon a monster will work to summon Elemental Hero Flame Wingman. And then, once you have all those components, either in your hand or on the field, depending on your fusion spell you're using, you can summon that time. Now, there are also cards out there that can be used as substitutes, as long as you have one material that is correct. It really just kind of depends on the fusion monster. Some fusion monsters are pretty generic, like maybe saying you just need 3 warrior monsters or something in order to summon. So make sure you're paying attention to what your fusion monsters need in order to summon. And that's kind of the nice thing about your extra decks, and that you can check them to kind of make sure that you have the materials you need in what you're doing. So again, in order to fusion summon, all you really need are 2 monsters, a fusion spell like Polymerization. You combine those 3 components, and bam, you get your fusion monster like Elemental Hero Flame Wingman. Now that isn't the only way to fusion summon though. The Elemental Hero archetype kind of has a lot of different types of ways of fusion summoning, because that's kind of like the big component of that deck. And one of those ways is with Elemental Hero Neos, who is technically an effect monster, even though he doesn't have an effect. And that is through what is called Contact Fusion, as it's commonly referred to. So all it requires in order to contact fuse is Elemental Hero Neos and another Neospatian, like Neospatian Air Hummingbird. You just take those two guys, you shuffle them back into your deck, and you get Elemental Hero Air Neos. That's kind of the nice, quick way to kind of another way to fusion summon monsters. Or just an alternative way to fusion summon. There is another archetype that kind of does something similar, and that is XYZ Dragon Cannon. I believe you just banish those components, and that's how you get XYZ Dragon Cannon out. To summon it. So that's just kind of an alternative way to fusion summon a monster or fusion a monster. And then there is also another way that heroes have, and that is with a card called Mask Change. So Mask Change is a quick spell that allows you to kind of fusion summon in a way a monster from your extra deck. This is kind of more of like a metamorphosis spell though, because heroes, or Neospatians I should say, have another card that also kind of takes a monster from it. They're still regarded as fusion monsters, even though they aren't technically like fusion summoned the traditional way. But essentially back onto a Mask Change and Elemental Hero Avian here. So I wanted to summon a masked hero. I just used Mask Change. I target a monster that matches an archetype in my card or my deck, and I get Masked Hero Blast. So those are just a couple alternative ways of fusion summoning out there. So just read your fusion monsters and kind of see what they need to get them out there, and make sure that you have your components that you need, or like a good substitute, and then you can easily fusion summon. Moving on, we got our Synchro Summoning. Synchro Summoning was introduced in Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds. That's kind of like the big main component. And you can kind of think of Synchro Summoning as Ritual Summoning, because it requires one special trigger card that we need, and that is our tuner monsters. I mentioned tuner monsters in our last video, but I didn't really talk about them much. But the biggest thing to kind of know about tuner monsters is that they are essential to synchro summoning. And then another thing that makes kind of synchro summoning very similar to ritual summoning is that not only do you need a special like trigger card, you need cards that equal the level of the monster you're trying to summon. So let's take Red Dragon Archfiend here. He is a level 8 monster. So in order to summon him, I need a tuner who just happens to be level 3, Dark Resonator, and another monster. Vice Dragon here is level 5. So that means I can use those two monsters to summon Red Dragon Archfiend. Similar to your fusion monsters, your synchro monsters will tell you what kind of materials it needs, and how many tuners it needs. Typically you can refine with just one tuner monster, but sometimes you might need more than one tuner monster. And then again, as long as you have monsters that equal that level, you can get to your synchro monster. Unfortunately, unlike ritual summoning, synchro monsters are very precise about the level of the monster you're using to summoning them. So you can't use a monster that is level 9 or higher to summon a monster that is level 8 like Red Dragon Archfiend. You always have to be precise with that number, so at some point you have to lower that level of a monster down so you can synchro summon that monster at the level that it needs. Luckily, a lot of synchro decks have that kind of support, but the big downside, aside from just kind of that level, so you typically have to have both of your monsters out on the field in order to synchro summon. So you need your tuner and another monster out there in order to reach that synchro summoning. Kind of like I was saying, thankfully a lot of synchro archetypes have effects or cards that can help cross that barrier to kind of make them stronger. But that's kind of the downside, is if you can't get the other monsters you need out, if you can't get the materials you need, the components in order to synchro summon, you can't get any of the levels you want, you can't get your tuners out there, you can't get your material, you're kind of up a creek without a paddle. So make sure you're being very careful about your synchro summoning, and you're kind of playing it smart. But again, just kind of right here real quick, if I wanted to synchro summon someone like Red Dragon Archfiend, all I need are two monsters. One's a tuner, and one is a non-tuner monster. One's level 3, one's level 5. Combine those two beautiful monsters together, and I get Red Dragon Archfiend. So that's synchro summoning for you in a nutshell. Alright, XZ summoning. So this was introduced in Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal, and XZ is unique in that it requires two monsters kind of that are used kind of on the field as material underneath your extra monster, and I'll kind of demonstrate that here. So I've got two level 8 monsters here. If I slide those two guys together and I place my XZ's monster on top, I've successfully XZ's summoned a monster. So number 62 here, Galaxy Eyes Prime Photon Dragon, is a XZ's monster. He resides in the extra deck. His components do not reside in the extra deck; those hang out in the main deck. And as you can see here, his requirement is 2 level 8 monsters. I used 2 level 8 Galaxy Eyes Dragons, just slid them underneath them as material, and now I can use those cards to kind of activate his effects. And that's kind of the drawback of the XZ's monsters, is if they don't have material, you can't really use their effects. So that's the big downside of them. But luckily, kind of as I've kind of the theme I've been kind of talking about with these different types of summoning, there are cards out there to kind of benefit and support those cards that either give you more summoning, replace summoning, take summoning from another card, even discard cards from monsters without activating those effects. So make sure when you're building your decks, you know, or you've got all the cards you need. A lot of the times your archetypes are going to have those supports you need, but it doesn't hurt to kind of branch out into other archetypes or even do other cards and just kind of see what they have there to kind of help out your deck here. So again, XZ's monsters, pretty simple. You just need the components that you need, slide them underneath, put your XZ's monster on top, and you've successfully XZ'd summon. Alright, this is kind of our last extra deck fancy monster, and that is Link Summoning. So you can think of Link Summoning as very similar to Tribute Summoning. So I've got 3 monsters right here, and I'm just going to tribute all of them together to Link Summon a monster. And so in this case, I Link Summoned Dark Templar at Inkister. So like I said, Link Summoning is very similar to Tribute Summoning. You need a number of monsters to reach it, which again, another really common thing, just going to kind of reiterate this to everyone. Your extra monster that you're trying to summon is going to tell you what it needs. So I just needed 3 monsters with different names. I had those, I attributed them, and I got my Link monster. Link monsters are kind of special in a lot of different ways compared to the other monsters. And that is, Link monsters can only be summoned to the extra monster zone, with one exception, which we'll get in here shortly. So we'll talk about this in the fields when we get into fields, when we get to dueling. But there's a little spot above kind of your main playing area where extra monsters kind of live. That's their nice little home spot. They love it. You can put other extra monsters there, but Link monsters love that the most. And then underneath those Link monsters, you have these little arrows here. These little arrows, 1, 2, 3. These little red arrows are what makes a Link monster kind of special, because whenever a monster is kind of put underneath those arrows, an effect happens. So for Dark Templar here, for example, if a monster is special summoned to one of those arrows, I can then summon as many lower level monsters to that from the graveyard to those arrows, which then just allows me to Link summon again. This is also causes something that is called linking, or co-linking monsters, which is generally referred to when you have another linked monster in it, because if you Link summon another monster, you can only summon it underneath an arrow of another Link monster. You can't summon it to your opponent's field if you got arrows pointing over there. That's reserved specifically for them. You either then have to replace that Link monster you're using, or hopefully you have a Link arrow underneath them to where you can summon them too. So that's kind of like just the trick with Link summoning. So anyways, co-linking a monster is when you have another Link monster with an arrow pointing up to your Link monster, and they have an arrow pointing down to your other Link monster. They are now linked. Generally, there isn't really a big benefit that comes out of this, except unless there's an effect that says when co-linked or when pointing to a monster. That's kind of really where the arrows come into play, is like knowing what happens when something is pointing at those arrows. So make sure you're kind of reading your card and you're just looking at the arrows. But another important thing to kind of note about Link monsters is that they don't have defense points, which means they can't be flipped face down to defense mode, and they can't be switched to defense mode. They're always an attack. That's also kind of a negative, because when you summon a Link monster, you can't summon them in defense mode. And so if you have Link monsters that are weaker to your opponent's monsters, and you don't have a way to get past that monster in any way, your Link monsters are then kind of in trouble, and so are your life points. But what they do have next to their attack points is what we call a Link rating. That is these little line right here. You'll see that Dark Templar here is a Link 3. So what link 3 means is a good way to help kind of tell you how many materials you need to tribute or to link together to summon a link monster. So Dark Templar as a link 3 rating requires 3 monsters. That's what I use to summon them. But the big benefit of that is, again, is if I wanted to say a link 4 monster, I can use Dark Templar as 3 material for that, and I just need 1 more monster to reach that summon. And so I could have summoned Dark Templar here with a link 2 monster and just 1 more monster, and it still would have worked the same because I used the monster as 2 materials for that. So a quick rundown again of how to link summoning and what link monsters, how that works, is that link summoning is very similar to tribute summoning. You need a certain number of monsters, even just 1. You can then tribute that monster to get your link summoning. For Dark Templar here, I used 3 monsters, tributed those guys, and I got them. Underneath those arrows, I can link summon other monsters, or I can just place other monsters to activate Dark Templar's effect, depending on what the effect of his is, depending on what it says. As a link 3, I can also then use Dark Templar to summon a link 4 or higher monster. I think links actually only goes up to 4. And we are moving on to our last extra monsters. They aren't really extra monsters. I just kind of put them as extra monsters because they do a lot, and that is Pendulum monsters. Pendulum monsters generally just kind of hang out in your main deck, but they can go to your extra deck, and I'll explain how in a second. So Pendulum monsters were introduced in Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc V, and they are special because of their pendulum scale and their pendulum effects. So you'll notice here on Edgemp, Continent Eater, and Fluffle Angel that they've got little numbers here in this little extra tech box, kind of taking up a lot of their art. And you have numbers there. 1 is an 8, 1 is a 1. So in order to set our pendulum scale, I'll need to take those 2 monsters and place them in my spell and trap zone. Again, I'll make this very clear when we get into dueling and kind of using a field and kind of talking about what to bring to a deck. Some duel mats or game mats might have a pendulum scale for you to set things in. Generally though, you're not going to have that, so you're going to have to set your monsters in your spell and trap card zone. But you set those guys down there, and now I've got a scale from 1 to 8. What that means is I can then summon any number of monsters from my hand that fit in between that scale, between 1 and 8, to my field, just for my hand, which is what makes Pendulum monsters pretty great summoning, and you can do that at any point, as many times as you want, as long as you got that scale and you got those monsters that reach it. Now, when Pendulum monsters are destroyed, they're placed face up in your extra deck. That way your opponent knows what's there, and then you also kind of know it's easier. You don't shuffle them. They are always constantly on top of your extra deck. And then those Pendulum monsters can then be resummoned into your field through Pendulum summoning if you have another monster that kind of completes your scale here. Pendulum monsters also have a monster effect, so they kind of have 2 effects. Typically, there are some normal Pendulum monsters out there that don't have an effect when they are just a normal monster, but when they're in the Pendulum scale they do. So make sure you're paying attention to that. But generally when they are in the Pendulum scale, they will also have an effect that kind of gives an edge to you in combat against your opponent, and they also have their monster effect, which can also help you out. So that is Pendulum monsters for you. Alright gang, that pretty much takes it up for all of our extra monsters. We talked a lot, we covered a lot of grounds there. So let me know in the comments below if you want me to go over or kind of go more in depth about a certain type of extra monster like rituals, fusion, exes, whatever, and I can do that for you. But you can also make sure you let me know down which of those monsters you kind of like the most, or which method you were more interested in learning or trying. I know I love fusion monsters just because those are Jaden's cards, and he has them in the hero monsters. One of my favorite archetypes uses it. But I've also gained a really big fan of link summoning and synchro summoning. I'm still kind of trying to get a handle on pendulum summoning. I don't really have a lot of decks that I use it for. But yeah, I think they're all really cool techniques that kind of help keep Yu-Gi-Oh! Fresh in that sense. Thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Flip that bell icon face up so that way you can get notified of my videos, and make sure that you have subscribed so that way you can see those videos as well once they are posted. To get an edge against the meta, don't forget to check out my Patreon down below in the description to support that, so that way you can get your early access to videos, you can get my bonus contents, and you can get your name in the comments or credits as being a producer of the show. Thank you all again so much for watching. If no one has told you in a while, I am proud of you and you are loved. Keep on rocking, rock stars. Love ya.